Hi, my name is Jenica and I'm back with another Geologist Plays Minecraft video. In my last video, I talked about the igneous rocks of Minecraft, and now I'm going to go over some of the sedimentary rocks. Now, as I described in my last video, igneous rocks are formed from the crystallization of molten rock. So you have a liquid rock, you have magma, you have lava, and it cools until it becomes a rock. In sedimentary rocks, you have fragments of older rocks that are then incorporated into newer rocks. We can learn a lot from sedimentary rocks. Some preserve textures that tell us where they were made and what environment they were formed. Other rocks contain minerals that are really old, and the rocks themselves haven't been preserved, but the minerals are. We actually have an example at the Field Museum of the Jack Hills conglomerate. It is a sedimentary rock that is formed up of larger pebbles. That's not a pebble, that's a pebble. But even in this rock that has a lot of these larger fragments, we have tiny, smaller fragments of zircons. And even though the rock itself isn't as old, the rocks inside are older. And some of those fragments are the oldest terrestrial material we have. So sedimentary rocks are very important. And I'm going to go over some of the sedimentary blocks that are present in Minecraft. So I'm hanging out in one of the many desert biomes around our spawn, and I've put together a little collection of the sediment and sandstones that are available in Minecraft. So I've arranged them in order from largest to smallest as far as grain size goes. So gravel is sediment that is 2 millimeters or larger. At least it is in geology. I don't know how it's defined in Minecraft. Sand is sediment that has a grain size between 2 millimeters and 1/16 of a millimeter. Clay is sediment that is smaller than 1/256th of a millimeter. So really, when you're looking at clay, you can't visually determine its grain size. You really have to either feel it or look under a microscope to measure it. So let's start with gravel. Gravel is a large particle size, and one of the things that we can determine from particle size is the energy of the environment that it came from. So it takes a lot of energy, usually water, to actually move particles of this size. So when we find gravel in the real world, we usually find it in places like mountain streams where you have these very violent or fast moving or just large volumes of water that are going down a relatively steep slope. Now, sand is a finer particle. It requires less energy to move, but it still does require quite a bit, which is why we see a lot of sand at beaches. The waves of the ocean have enough energy to transport the sand around. You also have a lot of high winds in certain deserts that can actually entrain these particles into the air, and that's how they move around. Now, clay is your fine particle size, and this is deposited in very low energy environments. So when we think of like the deep ocean where there's just not a lot of movement in the water, this is the environment in which clay can be deposited. Because if you have something like a beach, it is likely that the clay particles are going to remain in suspension in that water. Now, I have two varieties of sand. So first off, I have red sand and I have normal sand. So there aren't any further details given in Minecraft, but what we can tell from the color of the sand, just looking at it, field work, that kind of thing, usually when we don't have that clear or very light colored sand, there's some other mineral inside that sand. And the really red sandstone rocks, those are usually rocks that contain feldspar. So when we're looking at this sand, the light sand, it is primarily quartz. It is there might be some other grains within there, but if you spread that sand out on your palm or something and you look at each grain individually, it's going to be clear or white. Now, if you do that with this red sand, you'll find other minerals. And like I said before, that other mineral is likely going to be feldspar. Now, feldspar is a rock that can have a pink color, and that is going to make the entire rock pink. Now, so far, I've mostly been talking about the sand. So we've got red sand and we've got regular sand. But what about the rocks that I've placed underneath? And these are indeed rocks. These are sandstones. So we've got the red variety and we've got the regular variety. So what makes sandstone different from sand? Well, in Minecraft, you can see how sand is affected by gravity. If I knock out the block underneath it, the one on top will fall. But sandstone, you can cut out the blocks underneath. So that's why you might want to use sandstone to build if you want to have the color of the sand. But let's talk about how sand becomes sandstone, because that's where sandstone comes from. It is the lithification of sand. So what is lithification? Well, it is the process in geology where sand or any other type of sediment becomes a rock. So remember, we're talking about other rocks that are broken up and then become new rocks. So that's different from something like an igneous rock where you have to melt the rock. No, you just have to break up the rock and then put it in a new rock. And when you have something like gravel, a lot of times you can actually look at the individual sediment pieces and figure out what that rock used to be. So how does sand become sandstone? Well, lithification involves two things, and Minecraft illustrates one of them pretty well. So we need compaction and we need cementation. So we need to have enough pressure to push the sand together to form a rock, because you have to have a hard enough rock that it'll stay together. I'm going to knock this out. Oh, that's so satisfying. And the other thing is cementation. So you have to have some sort of glue sticking your sand particles together, right? So you can push sand together really hard, but it's just going to fall apart. If you have something connecting it, something to keep the different sand particles together, then it'll stay together. And you know, different rocks have different degrees of both of those things. That has different degrees of compaction and cementation. But in general, we can describe the process of sediment, like sand, turning into rock, like sandstone, by the process of lithification. So I briefly talked about the energy required for sediment to be deposited. So we know how a sedimentary rock forms, but where does a sedimentary rock form? Now, rocks like sandstone, which we see, over here, those can form in deserts. You can also have sedimentary rocks that have textures that show that they were formed in beaches. But what about something like clay and gravel? Now, as I said before, clay has to be deposited in a low energy environment. And I gave the example of the ocean floor. There's not a lot of currents there that are going to entrain sediment. So what do we see in the oceans here on Minecraft? So we go down, and this is one of the deeper ocean biomes, and it is almost all gravel. Now, this doesn't make sense in geology. You're not going to have these really large particles deposited in the ocean. You're going to see the entire seafloor coated in clay. That's what would make more sense. Now, I'm not saying that Minecraft needs to replace all of its seafloor sediment with clay instead of gravel, because gravel can be a really useful building block, and I like that there's so much of it available. But what I am saying is that you're not going to deposit something large like gravel on the bottom of the ocean where there just isn't enough energy to even get it there in the first place. And then we have something like, this area where gravel is deposited next to clay, which is deposited next to sand. Like, you're just not really going to see that in real life. I am going to leave you with a view of my base, which is a giant mushroom on a mushroom island. And since it is almost dark, I should get back to my spawn point before the phantoms start spawning. Well, I hope you learned a little something about sediment and sandstone in this video, and I'd like to thank you all for watching, and if you liked this video, check out my other one on the igneous rocks of Minecraft. Bye!